Did medieval queens truly rule from gilded cages, or were their royal lives packed with unseen power plays and desperate heartbreaks? What if their personal thoughts, kept hidden from every prying eye, finally surfaced? What if their deepest desires and most strategic betrayals were finally revealed? Centuries later, from the year 1137 to 1485. Number 13. Eleanor of Aquitaine's forbidden knowledge in the Holy Land. The year was 1147. Europe held its breath as the Second Crusade swept across the continent, promising glory and salvation. King Louis VII of France led his armies, and by his side, resplendent in her finery, was his young queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Chroniclers of the time often painted her as a grand, if somewhat frivolous, companion on this holy quest. They spoke of her baggage train, her ladies-in-waiting, and sometimes, with a hint of scandal, her independent spirit. But what if Eleanor's presence in the Levant was far more than mere accompaniment? What if her true objectives, secretly scribbled into her private vellum pages, was to gather intelligence, not for her husband, but for her own future ambitions? Or perhaps even for a different power entirely? Historical accounts from William of Tyre and Otto of Freising detail the military blunders and strategic failures of the Second Crusade. The French forces, unprepared for the harsh conditions and the cunning tactics of their Seljuk opponents, suffered heavy losses. Yet, within this chaos, Eleanor, a woman known for her keen intellect and political acumen, was not merely observing. Her diary entries, if they existed, would have detailed not just the exhaustion of the marches or the scarcity of water, but the precise weaknesses of the Crusader armies. She would have noted the rivalries among the French and German leaders, the discontent among the common soldiers, and the surprising resilience of the local populations. Consider the events at Antioch. Raymond of Poitiers, Eleanor's uncle, and the Prince of Antioch, was a medic and politically astute ruler. He sought to divert the Crusader forces towards Aleppo, a strategic Muslim stronghold, rather than continue the ill-fated march to Jerusalem. Louis VII, however, stubbornly refused, determined to fulfill his pilgrimage vow. Histories suggest a growing closeness between Eleanor and her uncle, sparking rumors and scandal. Yet from Eleanor's perspective, captured in her private writings, this was not a scandalous affair, but a meeting of minds. She would have understood Raymond's strategic vision, recognizing the folly of Louis's unyielding piety. Her diary might have recorded their discussions late into the night, mapping out the political landscape of the Outremer, learning about the local power structures, the trade routes, and the intricate network of alliances and enmities among the Muslim emirs. These were secrets no king would share with his queen, certainly not one he increasingly viewed with suspicion and frustration. She would have seen the limitations of European feudal warfare against the agile, decentralized forces of the region. She might have made observations about the different cultural practices, the architectural strengths of certain fortresses, or the agricultural potential of specific valleys. This was not the idle curiosity of a pampered queen. It was the sharp assessment of a future sovereign, absorbing information that would be invaluable in her later political life, particularly when she became Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right. A territory far removed from French courtly life, her forbidden knowledge would have also extended to the internal dynamics of the Crusader states themselves. She would have observed the fragile alliances between the Franks and the indigenous Christian populations, the constant threat of internal feuds, and the reliance on tenuous supply lines. Her personal notes might have detailed specific conversations with Knights Templar or Hospitaller, learning about their intelligence networks, their battle tactics, and their financial dealings. Such information would be highly sensitive, given to her not as a queen, but as a fellow political player, a woman capable of understanding and perhaps leveraging these insights. After the disastrous siege of Damascus and the ultimate failure of the Crusade, Eleanor returned to France, her marriage to Louis VII severely strained. Her alleged diary would have chronicled her growing disillusionment with Louis's leadership, his perceived weakness, and his inability to grasp the larger Italy realities. She would have detailed her own frustration, not just with her personal circumstances, but with the squandered opportunity, the lives lost, and the shattered dream of a successful crusade. The forbidden knowledge she gained in the Holy Land, a deep understanding of military strategy, geomaneuvering, and the complex human element of power, would become a quiet weapon in her arsenal, shaping her decisions in the tumultuous decades that followed, allowing her to navigate the treacherous courts of both France and England with an insider's view of the world's powers. Number 12. Isabella of France's merciless calculations in exile. In the early 14th century, whispers of discontent turned into a roar against King Edward II of England. His favor for Piers Gaveston, and later Hugh Despencer the Younger, alienated the English nobility, creating deep resentments that festered for years. Queen Isabella, Edward's wife and sister to the powerful French king Charles IV, found herself in an increasingly desperate and isolated position. The Despensers, ruthless and greedy, seized royal power, stripping Isabella of her lands and income, even separating her from her children. Historical chronicles, such as those by Geoffrey the Baker, depict Isabella's growing despair and simmering fury. But what if her flight to France in 1325, ostensibly to negotiate a peace treaty over Gascony, was not merely an escape, but the culmination of a meticulously planned scheme for revenge and a complete overthrow of her husband? Her diary, if it existed, would reveal the cold, calculated precision with which she plotted her return, not as a suppliant queen, but as a conquering force. Her entries would detail the initial cautious approaches she made to key figures in her brother's court, not asking for pity, but for alliances. She would have noted the political climate in France, the strengths and weaknesses of her brother's position, and the willingness of French nobles to support a venture that would destabilize their English rival. Her diary might have revealed her first meeting with Roger Mortimer, an exiled English nobleman who had been a fierce opponent of the Despensers and Edward II. Histories often present their relationship as a passionate affair, a whirlwind romance that fueled their shared ambition. But Isabella's private writings might paint a different picture. A pragmatic partnership, a strategic alliance born not of love, but of a shared hunger for power and a mutual enemy. She would have assessed Mortimer's military prowess, his influence among the English exiles, and his deep-seated desire for retribution. She would have seen him as a vital piece on her chessboard, a blunt instrument to wield against a king who had effectively imprisoned her within her own marriage. The merciless calculations would extend to her own son, the young Prince Edward. Isabella used him as a pawn, the legitimate heir around whom all opposition to Edward II could rally. Her diary entries might have detailed her convincing her brother Charles IV to grant the prince homage for Gascony, a move that publicly undermined Edward II's authority and positioned her son as an alternative center of power. She would have described the subtle manipulations, the whispered promises, and the quiet coercion she employed to ensure that her son, young and impressionable, remained firmly under her influence. Every decision, from the assembly of a small invasion fleet in Dordrecht to the recruitment of disaffected English lords and mercenaries, would have been meticulously planned and documented. Her diary would not have been a chronicle of emotional turmoil, but a ledger of calculated risks and potential rewards. The entries would reveal her unwavering focus on the objective, the complete removal of Edward II and the establishment of a new order, where she, alongside Mortimer, would hold the reins of power. Her diary would recount the journey across the Channel in September 1326, not as a desperate flight, but as a triumphant return. She would have documented the surge of support they received upon landing in Suffolk, the nobles who flocked to their banner, eager to escape the tyranny of the Despensers. Her entries would be filled with the names of those who pledged loyalty, the resources they offered, and the strategic advantages gained. With each new defection, the capture of Edward II and the summary executions of the Despensers would be recorded with chilling detachment, not as acts of vengeance, but as necessary steps in consolidating power. Isabella's merciless calculations culminated in the deposition of Edward II, an unprecedented act against a reigning English monarch. Her diary would reveal her role in orchestrating the parliamentary declaration, ensuring that the young Prince Edward was crowned king, thereby legitimizing her own regency. It would be a testament to a woman who, pushed to the brink, turned her desperation into an unstoppable force, demonstrating a chilling resolve to achieve her aims, no matter the human cost. Number 11. Margaret of Anjou's unseen scars of war. The mid-15th century plunged England into the brutal dynastic conflict known as the Wars of the Roses. The heart of the Lancastrian cause stood Margaret of Anjou, Queen of England, wife of the saintly but weak King Henry VI, and fierce protector of her son Edward of Westminster. Chroniclers, often sympathetic to the Yorkist cause, painted her as the she-wolf of France, a ruthless and vengeful queen whose ambition fueled the bloodshed. But what if her private diary, if it existed, unveiled a different truth? The devastating personal toll of constant warfare, the unseen scars that accumulated with each battle, each loss, and each moment of desperate uncertainty. Her entries would not be filled with grand strategic plans, but with the raw, visceral experience of a queen forced to live on the run, constantly fearing for her life and the lives of her loved ones. Her diary would describe the agony of separation from her husband, Henry VI, who suffered from bouts of mental instability, leaving her to bear the burden of leadership alone. She would have documented the frustration of trying to rally support for a king who was often unresponsive, or worse, catatonic. Her entries might detail the sleepless nights spent in makeshift camps, the constant movement from one stronghold to another, always a step ahead of the pursuing Yorkist armies. She would have chronicled the chilling fear that gripped her heart every time news of a battle reached her, not knowing if her husband was alive, or if her young son, the future of the Lancastrian line, was safe. The unseen scars would begin with the Battle of St. Albans in 1455, the first major clash of the war. Her diary might describe the chaotic retreat, the terror of fleeing from a victorious enemy, and the sight of fallen Lancastrian banners. She would have documented the desperate scramble to secure allies, to raise new armies, and to keep the flickering flame of her family's claim to the throne alive. The period of her son's minority would be a recurring theme in her private writings. She would express the immense pressure of raising a child in wartime, teaching him to be a king while constantly in flight, shielding him from the brutality she herself witnessed daily. Her diary would reveal the heart-wrenching decisions she had to make, sacrificing personal comfort, abandoning possessions, and trusting her son's fate to the loyalty of a few, often treacherous, allies. She would write of the cold, the hunger, the constant threat of capture, and the profound loneliness of her position, unable to fully trust anyone, even those who fought by her side. The psychological impact of battles like Towton in 1461, one of the bloodiest in English history, would leave deep marks in her entries. She would describe the crushing news of defeat, the thousands of dead, the flight into exile in Scotland, and then to France. She would recount the bitter taste of reliance on foreign powers, the endless negotiations, and the humiliation of begging for support to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. These were not the calculated maneuvers of a she-wolf, but the desperate acts of a mother fighting for her child's inheritance, driven by an unshakable belief in the justice of her cause. The ultimate unseen scar would be the death of her son, Prince Edward, at the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. Her diary would shift from strategic concerns to a profound, soul-crushing grief. It would describe the moment she heard the news, the disbelief, the utter despair, the shattering of every hope and dream she had fought for. The subsequent death of King Henry VI, often attributed to the victorious Yorkists, would only deepen this wound, leaving her utterly alone, her family's cause irrevocably lost. Her final entries, written from prison and then during her eventual release and return to France, would not be of bitterness or vengeance, but of profound exhaustion, a chronicle of a life irrevocably shaped by the ceaseless demands of war. Margaret of Anjou's private thoughts would reveal that the wars she waged were not just political battles. but deeply personal struggles that left her with lasting wounds that no royal crown could ever heal. Number 10. Matilda of England's forgotten allies in the anarchy. The mid-12th century plunged England into a brutal civil war, a period known as the Anarchy, sparked by the death of King Henry I, without a clear male heir. Empress Matilda, his only surviving legitimate child, believed the throne was hers by right, having been designated heir by her father. Yet her cousin Stephen of Blois seized the crown, plunging the country into 2 decades of intermittent warfare. Chroniclers, of the time predominantly male, and often aligned with Stephen, frequently depicted Matilda as haughty, unyielding, and unable to win the support of the English barons. But what if her private diary, if it existed, revealed the forgotten allies she cultivated, not just among the powerful lords but among the common people, the church, and even unexpected foreign powers whose silent contributions were essential to her prolonged resistance? Her entries would detail the intricate web of relationships she meticulously built far beyond the battlefield. Her diary would describe the subtle appeals she made to local communities, not just to the castellans of fortresses. She would chronicle the desperate journeys across war-torn landscapes, seeking refuge in monasteries and churches, and forging bonds with abbots and bishops who, despite their vows of neutrality, offered her in financial support. These were not grand alliances, but quiet, personal acts of defiance against Stephen's authority, often based on shared faith or a deep-seated belief in legitimate succession. Matilda's entries might detail conversations with humble peasants, their grievances against Stephen's tax collectors, and their quiet support for her cause, providing food warnings of troop movements or safe passage through dangerous territories. These were the forgotten allies, those who risked their lives without expectation of reward, simply because they believed in her claim, or were desperate for an end to the chaos. Her diary would recount the psychological warfare she waged, not with armies but with messages and propaganda spreading her claim through a network of scribes and sympathetic clergy. She would have noted the importance of her father's legacy, reminding people of Henry I's strong rule and contrasting it with Stephen's perceived weakness and inability to control his own barons. Her entries might reveal the careful cultivation of support from her half-brother, Robert, Earl of Gloucester, her most steadfast military commander. But beyond him, she would have documented the smaller, less prominent knights and landowners who remained loyal despite the overwhelming odds, offering their limited resources and unwavering courage. She would describe the strategies of siege and counter-siege, not just in terms of military might, but in terms of endurance and the psychological toll on both sides. Relying on the quiet strength of her garrisons, period of her near capture at Oxford in 1142 and her desperate escape across the frozen Thames would be recounted with chilling detail. Her diary would not just describe the physical ordeal, but the vital assistance she received from local villagers who guided her through the snow or provided warm clothing and food. These were the unsung heroes whose loyalty allowed her to survive. Her entries would also reveal her quiet, diplomatic efforts abroad, not just in her husband, Geoffrey of Anjou's court, but with various European princes, and even the Pope, seeking moral and sometimes even financial support against Stephen. These were the forgotten allies of international politics, whose subtle pressure on the English church and nobility kept Stephen from fully consolidating his power. While Matilda never formally ascended the English throne, her prolonged struggle ultimately led to the Treaty of Winchester, which recognized her son Henry as Stephen's heir. Her diary would show that this victory was not just due to her military campaigns, but to the unwavering loyalty and countless small acts of support from an array of forgotten allies who believed in her cause, sustained her efforts, and ultimately shaped the future. The English Crown. Number 9. Blanch of Castiles' masterful deception in the face of treason. The early 13th century in France saw a kingdom grappling with the recent Albigensian Crusade, a regency for a child king, and a powerful, resentful nobility. Queen Blanche of Castile, widow of Louis VIII and mother of the young Louis IX, was thrust into the role of regent. Chroniclers, like Matthew Paris, often lauded her piety and shrewdness, but public image lay a queen who employed tactics of masterful deception to navigate the treacherous waters of French politics, ensuring her son's ascent to full power while outmaneuvering powerful. Emmeline Horror. Her diary, if it existed, would reveal the cunning, the calculated charm, and the subtle manipulations she used to protect her son and the kingdom, often by feigning weakness or cultivating false trust. Her entries would detail the widespread conspiracy of 1226, when many of the great barons, led by Peter Mauclerc of Brittany, formed a league against her regency, challenging her authority and aiming to seize control of the young king. Blanche's diary would describe how she did not meet their challenge with open warfare immediately, but with a series of masterful deceptions. She would have recorded her feigned willingness to negotiate, inviting the rebellious lords to a parley, giving them a false sense of security and control. While publicly appearing to compromise, she would have secretly rallied her loyal supporters, consolidating her resources and preparing for a swift, decisive strike. Her entries might reveal how she used her perceived vulnerability as a foreign queen and a widow to gain sympathy, subtly appealing to the chivalric instincts of some nobles, or to the religious fervor of others, painting the rebellious lords as traitors to God and their rightful king. Her diary would recount the specific details of the dramatic episode at Montelheri in 1227. As she traveled with the young Louis IX toward Orleans, her route was intentionally leaked, luring the conspirators into an ambush. Blanche's private writings would detail her deliberate choice of route, a narrow pass where her small retinue could appear vulnerable. She would describe the careful positioning of her loyal troops hidden from view, waiting for the signal. Her diary might reveal her inner calm, or perhaps a chilling thrill as she watched the trap spring. The rebellious lords, confident in their superior numbers, found themselves suddenly surrounded and outmaneuvered, forced to withdraw in humiliation. This was not a lucky escape. It was a planned entrapment, a masterful deception that exposed the conspirators' intentions while demonstrating Blanche's hidden strength. Her diary would also document her interactions with Thibault IV, Count of Champagne, a powerful and erratic noble who was a constant threat. Blanche's entries would reveal her use of flirtation and personal charm, creating a public perception of an illicit romance to both disarm Thibault and sow discord among his allies, leading to his eventual isolation and defection from the rebel lead. She would have detailed how she subtly played different factions against each other, exploiting their rivalries and ambitions, promising favors to some while threatening others, always maintaining the illusion of impartiality, while secretly favoring those who served her purposes. The most enduring masterful deception would be her portrayal innocent child in need of protection, which garnered him public sympathy and legitimacy, while secretly she was grooming him to be a strong, independent monarch, ensuring he understood the intricate political game she was playing on his behalf. Blanche of Castile's private writings would lay bare the cunning, the calculated risks, and the strategic misdirections that allowed her to secure her son's throne and preserve the power of the French monarchy, and purse overwhelming odds. Number 8. Eleanor of Aquitaine's secret contempt for Louis VII. The marriage of Eleanor of Aquitaine and King Louis VII of France, solemnized in 1137, began with high hopes. She, a vibrant, independent duchess of a vast southern territory, and he, a pious ascetic monarch. Conventional histories often portray their union as a clash of personalities, a failure of temperaments, and differing ambitions. But what if Eleanor's private diary spanning the 15 years of their marriage revealed not just a clash, but a deep-seated, secret contempt for her husband, a growing disdain that went beyond mere incompatibility and became a driving force in her desire for annulment? Her entries would go far beyond chronicling disagreements. They would expose her profound disappointment and her sharp critique of Louis's perceived weaknesses, both as a man and as a king. Her diary would detail her initial impressions of Louis, perhaps a polite observation of his quiet piety, turning into a growing frustration with his lack of worldly ambition. She would have documented her struggles to reconcile her own grand vision for Aquitaine and France with his monastic simplicity. Her entries might describe specific instances where she felt Louis's judgment was flawed, his decisions short-sighted, or his leaders inadequate. She would have noted his reliance on clerical advisors, his hesitation in warfare, and his profound disinterest in the rich cultural life that defined her own ducal court. This was not just a queen observing her king. It was a powerful sovereign sizing up a rival, finding him wanting. The secret contempt would not manifest as open defiance initially, but as a subtle erosion of respect, a quiet accumulation of disappointments that solidified into a firm conviction that this marriage was a political and personal dead end. Her diary would recount her experiences on the Second Crusade, not just for the strategic knowledge gained, but for the stark contrast between Louis's ineffective leadership and the decisive actions of other figures. She would have detailed his refusal to heed advice, his stubborn adherence to impractical plans, and the devastating consequences for his army. Her entries might reveal her shame and embarrassment at his conduct, contrasting it sharply with the pragmatic, often ruthless, efficiency she admired in other powerful rulers. She would have chronicled specific instances where she felt his piety bordered on foolishness, where his compassion became weakness, and where his indecision cost lives and opportunities. This was a queen who saw power not just as divine right, but as the ability to govern, to lead, and to make difficult choices, qualities she found sorely lacking in her husband. The most telling entries would detail the growing chasm between their desires for an heir. While their marriage produced 2 daughters, Eleanor craved a son, an heir, to secure her vast inheritance and to carry on her legacy. Her diary would express her frustration, perhaps even her suspicion, that Louis's perceived shortcomings extended to his inability to provide a male heir. This secret contempt would reach its peak as she actively pursued an annulment, not just on grounds of consanguinity, but on the deeper, unspoken grounds of a fundamental incompatibility of spirits and ambitions. Her entries might describe the careful maneuvering, the discreet conversations with church officials, and the quiet determination to free herself from a union she increasingly viewed as a liability. Her diary would not just chronicle the end of the marriage, but the culmination of years of accumulating disdain, a testament to a woman who refused to be bound by a union with a man she could no longer and perhaps never truly did respect. Her subsequent marriage to Henry Plantagenet, a man of ferocious ambition and decisive action, would be the ultimate proof of her quest for a partner who matched her own powerful spirit. Number 7. Isabella of Francis pointing isolation after Mortimer's fall. In 1330, the young King Edward III, having come of age, orchestrated a dramatic coup against his mother Isabella and her powerful lover Roger Mortimer. Mortimer was captured, tried, and executed for treason, while Isabella was effectively placed under house arrest at Castle Rising, stripped of her political power, though still given a queen dowager's income. Conventional histories often portray her remaining years as a quiet, relatively comfortable retirement, her formidable spirit perhaps subdued by the abrupt end of her regency. But what if her private diary, if it existed, revealed a profound and haunting isolation, a crushing loneliness that pervaded her life after Mortimer's fall, a silence far more debilitating than any public disgrace? Her entries would document not just the loss of power, but the loss of purpose, of companionship, and the lingering specter of her past actions. Her diary would detail the immediate shock and despair of Mortimer's execution. She would describe the sense of betrayal, not from Edward III, but from fate itself, a cruel twist after years of relentless struggle and ultimate triumph. Her entries might express her confusion, her bitterness, and her inability to reconcile the powerful queen she once was with the confined dowager she had become. She would have chronicled the emptiness of the days, the quiet of the chambers that once buzzed with political intrigue, and the absence of the man who had been her partner in both crime and governance. The haunting isolation would be underscored by the lack of trusted confidants. Many of her former allies had either been executed, imprisoned, or had wisely distanced themselves from the fallen queen. Her diary would express her suspicion of those who remained, her inability to discern genuine loyalty from mere obligation, a paranoia born from the treacherous world she had once dominated. Her entries might reveal her attempts to connect with her children, particularly Edward III. While he visited her regularly and provided for her, the old bond of mother and son, once a powerful political tool, was irrevocably broken. Her diary would describe the strained conversations, the polite formalities, and the unspoken tension that filled the air between them. She would lament the distance, the knowledge that her son, now a powerful king, would never truly forgive her for her role in his father's deposition and death. She would feel the weight of his judgment even in his kindness. The haunting isolation would be compounded by the knowledge that she, once the she-wolf of France, was now merely a figurehead. Her reputation tarnished, her name whispered with a mixture of fear and condemnation. Her diary would recount the endless hours spent in quiet contemplation, revisiting her choices, her alliances, and her betrayals. She would reflect on the cost of power, the sacrifices made, and the ultimate futility of her ruthless pursuit of control. The grand schemes, the clandestine meetings, the dramatic invasion of England, and the subsequent deposition of a king, all would be replayed in her mind, now devoid of their former triumph. Instead, filled with a sense of emptiness. She might even question the very nature of her relationship with Mortimer, whether it was indeed love, or merely a shared ambition that left her stranded. Once its purpose was served, while historical accounts focus on her eventual spiritual devotion and her seemingly peaceful later years, Isabella's private writings would lay bare the profound inner struggle, the lingering supper. Number 6. Margaret of Anjou's secret strategic genius in the Lancastrian cause. Margaret of Anjou, Queen of England, is often remembered for her fierce protectiveness of her son and her unrelenting pursuit of the Lancastrian claim during the Wars of the Roses. Yorkist chroniclers largely portrayed her as a vindictive, overly ambitious foreign woman, responsible for much of the conflict's brutality. However, what if her private diary, if it existed, revealed a secret strategic genius, a shrewd mind capable of military and political maneuvering that rivaled her male counterparts, often obscured by the prevailing misogynistic views of the era? Her entries would not just be emotional outpourings, but precise analyses of battlefield strengths, logistical challenges, and de nudities. Her diary would detail her understanding of the complex feudal loyalties that defined the English nobility. She would have meticulously recorded the names of those who could be swayed, those who were unbreakably loyal to the Yorkists, and those whose allegiance could be balked or coerced. Her entries might describe her detailed assessments of various commanders, identifying their strengths and weaknesses, and discerning who could be trusted with crucial campaigns. She would have outlined the logistical challenges of raising and provisioning armies in a fragmented kingdom, noting the best routes for troop movements, the availability of supplies in different regions, and the financial hurdles of sustained warfare. This was not the work of a mere figurehead, but of a true commander, intimately involved in the practicalities of war. Her secret strategic genius would be evident in her diplomatic efforts abroad. Her diary would recount her arduous journeys to France and Scotland, not just to beg for aid, but to negotiate alliances, secure loans, and even promise territorial concessions in return for military support. She would have documented the intricate dance of international diplomacy, balancing the interests of the French monarchy, the Scottish regency, and the various powerful dukes and counts who held influence. Her entries might reveal her understanding of the political chess game of continental Europe, recognizing how England's internal strife could be leveraged by external powers, and how she could play these powers against each other to her own advantage. She would have outlined the precise terms of her treaties, the secret clauses, and the unspoken understandings that underpinned her foreign policy. The build up to the Battle of Wakefield in 1460 would be a prime example of her strategic foresight. Her diary entries would detail her decision to move north after the Battle of Northampton, gathering new forces and drawing the Duke of York into a decisive engagement on her terms. She would have recorded her assessment of York's overconfidence, his willingness to march into a trap, and her carefully laid plans to ambush his forces. Overwhelming Lancastrian victory at Wakefield, which saw the deaths of Richard, Duke of York, and his son Edmund, Earl of Rutland, would not be described as a stroke of luck, but as the direct result of her precise planning and execution. Her diary would also cover the Second Battle of St. Albans in 1461, where she personally led her army to a victory that freed her husband, King Henry VI. Her entries would describe her tactical decisions on the battlefield, her rallying of the troops, and her exploitation of the enemy's disorganization. These were not the actions of a queen, merely reacting to events, but of a shrewd and capable strategist whose military acumen was consistently underestimated by her contemporaries, and whose secret strategic genius often tipped the scales in a brutal war for the throne. Number 5. Eleanor of Aquitaine's unbreakable spirit. During imprisonment, Eleanor of Aquitaine's life, marked by 2 royal marriages and unprecedented political influence, took a dramatic turn in the mid-1170s. After supporting her son's rebellion against their father, King Henry II of England, Eleanor was captured and placed under effective house arrest and imprisonment that lasted for 16 years, moving between various castles across England. Historical accounts often refer to this period as a time of forced quiet. Her power diminished, her influence seemingly extinguished. But what if her private diary, if it existed, revealed the unbreakable spirit that allowed her to endure prolonged confinement, not just as a prisoner, but as a queen, and to plot her eventual return to power? Her entries would document not submission, but profound resilience and quiet defiance. Her diary would detail the physical and psychological toll of imprisonment. She would describe the varying conditions of her confinement, from comfortable apartments in Winchester to more austere lodgings in Salisbury, and the constant surveillance by Henry II's men. Her entries might express her frustration at the limitations placed upon her, the inability to travel, to communicate freely, or to directly influence her sons. Yet, even within these constraints, her unbreakable spirit would manifest. She would chronicle her dedication to self-improvement, perhaps through reading ancient texts, studying maps, or refining her already formidable diplomatic skills by observing the behavior of her captors and their visitors. She would find ways to maintain her sharp intellect, turning her enforced idleness into a period of strategic reflection. Her entries would reveal her unwavering belief in her sons, particularly Richard the Lionheart. Despite being physically separated, Eleanor used every available channel, however small, to send messages, offer advice, and fuel their ambition against their father. Her diary might describe the subtle signals she exchanged with loyal servants, the coded messages woven into embroidery patterns, or the trusted intermediaries who risked their lives to carry her words. She would have documented her quiet pride in Richard's military successes and his growing popularity, seeing them as direct challenges to Henry II's authority, and ultimately her own path to freedom. This was not the resignation of a defeated queen, but the strategic patience of a monarch biding her time, knowing that the political landscape could shift in her favor. The most poignant entries would describe her observation of the passing years, the changes in the English court, and the gradual decline of Henry II's power. She would have noted the king's failing health, the increasing resentment of his own nobles, and the constant squabbles among his remaining sons. Her diary would reveal her shrewd understanding of human nature, her ability to detect weakness, and her quiet anticipation of the inevitable moment when her fortunes would turn. She would have used her captivity as a form of intelligence, piecing together information from overheard conversations, from the gossip of her guards, and from the carefully screened letters she was allowed to receive. The unbreakable spirit would be evident in her refusal to break, to beg, or to surrender, her claim to her lands and her influence. When Henry II finally died in 1189 and Richard I ascended to the throne, one of his first acts was to release his mother. Eleanor's diary would not just record her physical release, but the triumphant realization that her perseverance had paid off, that her long confinement had not broken her, but had perhaps sharpened her resolve, making her even more formidable. Her subsequent years of regency for Richard would be a testament to her unyielding will. Number 4. Filipa of Hanots' secret compassion in warfare. Filipa of Hanots, Queen of England and wife of King Edward III, is remembered as a beloved and influential consort of the 14th century. Chroniclers like Jean Froissart often lauded her piety, her fertility, and her strong, gentle influence on her husband. She was a mother to numerous children, a patron of arts, and a capable regent when Edward was campaigning abroad. However, what if her private diary, if it existed, revealed a secret compassion that went beyond mere kindness? A quiet, strategic intervention in the brutal realities of medieval warfare that saved lives and shaped policy, often against the prevailing morality, often against the prevailing martial spirit of the age. Her entries would document not just her emotional responses, but her calculated use of influence to mitigate the cruelty of war. Her diary would detail the profound impact of warfare on the innocent. She would have recorded her horror at the devastation of towns, the suffering of civilians, and the endless stream of refugees. Her entries might describe specific instances where she personally intervened to provide aid, to shelter the displaced, or to advocate for their protection from marauding soldiers. This was not merely an act of charity, but a deliberate effort to temper the destructive forces of war, a recognition that unchecked brutality could destabilize the very lands her husband sought to control. The secret compassion would be most evident during periods of intense conflict, where the lives of ordinary people were most at risk. Her most famous act of compassion was during the siege of Calais in 1347. After a long and arduous siege, the city was forced to surrender. Edward III, enraged by the prolonged resistance, demanded that 6 leading burgesses be sent to him, bareheaded and with ropes around their necks, ready for execution. Froissart recounts Filipa, pregnant and tearful, kneeling before Edward begging for their lives. What her diary might reveal is that this was not a spontaneous outburst, but a carefully planned intervention. Her entries could detail her knowledge of Edward's temperament, her understanding of the political ramifications of such an execution, and her shrewd assessment that a public display of mercy would ultimately serve his long-term interests better than a vengeful act. She would have known the power of her image, a pregnant queen, pleading for mercy to influence not just her husband, but the broader court and future generations. Her diary would show the quiet calculation behind her tears. Her secret compassion would also extend to prisoners of war. Medieval warfare often involved brutal treatment of captives, particularly those who were not high-ranking enough to be ransomed. Filipa's diary might detail her efforts to ensure humane treatment for captured knights, to facilitate their exchange, and to advocate for fair terms of ransom. She would have recognized the importance of chivalry and the long-term benefits of fostering a reputation for mercy, even in the midst of conflict. Her entries might describe her subtle appeals to her husband, using her influence over his personal affections to temper his martial fervor, gently steering him towards more lenient policies where possible. She would have understood that a king renowned for his ruthlessness could inspire fear, but one who also displayed compassion could inspire loyalty and respect even from his enemies. Filipa of Hanots' private writings would not just confirm her gentle nature, but would reveal the strategic depth of her benevolence, a quiet force that shaped the conduct of war and left a lasting legacy of humanity in an often inhuman age. Number 3. Empress Matilda's hidden network of intelligence. Empress Matilda's long and bitter struggle for the English throne against her cousin Stephen of Blois, known as the Anarchy, was a period of shifting loyalties, treacherous alliances, and constant warfare. Traditional accounts often focus on the military campaigns and sieges. Yet, what if Matilda's private diary, spanning these 2 decades, revealed a hidden network of intelligence, a sophisticated system of spies, informants, and secret communication channels that allowed her to entreteniment and maintain her scattered forces despite constant adversities? Her entries would detail not just the grand strategies, but the subtle, often dangerous collection of vital information. Her diary would describe the varied sources of her intelligence. She would have documented the contributions of loyal monastic orders, whose widespread networks of abbeys and priories provided safe houses for messengers and discreet channels for information. Her entries might reveal her reliance on merchants and traders, whose regular travels across the fractured kingdom allowed them to observe troop movements, economic conditions, and local discontent. These were not agents in the modern sense, but individuals whose daily lives provided them with unique access to information which Matilda's network subtly tapped. She would have noted the specific individuals who provided the most valuable insights, their motivations, and the risks they took on her behalf. The hidden network would extend to Stephen's own court and strongholds. Her diary might reveal her contacts among disaffected knights, disgruntled servants, or even sympathetic clergy within Stephen's inner circle, who provided her with critical details about his plans, his financial difficulties, and the growing dissent among his own supporters. She would have described the coded messages she received, the secret meeting points, and the elaborate precautions taken to avoid detection. These were the most dangerous sources, risking torture and execution if exposed, a testament to the powerful loyalty or fierce opposition they felt towards her cause. Her entries would detail how she sifted through this information, distinguishing reliable intelligence from rumors or deliberate misinformation. A skill that required a keen mind and an understanding of human psychology. Her diary would recount specific instances where this intelligence proved critical. She might describe how a timely warning from a monastic informant allowed her forces to evade an ambush, or how a report from a traveling merchant revealed the weakness of a particular garrison leading to a successful siege. The infamous rout of Winchester in 1141, where Matilda was forced to flee the city under heavy pursuit by Stephen's forces, would be detailed not just as a desperate escape, but as a testament to her network's efficiency. Her entries would reveal the mental fortitude required to manage such a complex web of information, often in complete secrecy, knowing that a single leak could lead to disaster. Matilda's hidden network of intelligence, operating in the shadows of a brutal civil war, allowed her to prolong her struggle, to make strategic decisions with greater foresight, and ultimately to force a compromise that secured the throne for her son, Henry II. Number 2. Blanche of Castile's personal sacrifices for the crown. Blanche of Castile, Queen Regent of France, during the minority of her son Louis IX, navigated a treacherous political landscape with remarkable skill and determination. While her public image was one of shrewdness and piety, ensuring the stability of the Capetian monarchy, what if her private diary, if it existed, revealed the profound perstigmatistas? Her entries would document the deeply painful choices she made, weighing royal duty against maternal affection and placing the kingdom's needs above her own emotional well-being. Her diary would detail the constant gnawing worry for her children, especially her beloved son, Louis. She would describe the sacrifices she made to protect him from ambitious nobles who sought to abduct him or undermine his authority. Her entries might recount the lonely nights spent planning his security, the difficult decisions to separate him from trusted companions for his own safety, or the strict regimen of education and religious devotion she enforced, all to shape him into a king capable of ruling. She would express the personal cost of constantly scrutinizing every person around him, trusting no one entirely, and sacrificing the natural warmth of a mother-son relationship for the rigorous demands of royal upbringing. This was not just a queen raising an heir. It was a mother deliberately molding a monarch, knowing that any perceived weakness or indulgence could be exploited by her enemies. The personal sacrifices would extend to her own potential for remarriage. As a young, attractive widow, Blanche would have had many suitors, and a new marriage could have provided her with personal companionship and political alliances. Her diary entries would detail the offers she received, perhaps even her own fleeting desires for a life beyond the constant burden of regency. Yet, she consistently refused, understanding that a new husband, no matter how carefully chosen, would inevitably introduce a new center of power, potentially undermining her authority, or creating a rival to her sons, komen he under, mine hing, komen her fori. Her private writings would express the profound loneliness of this choice, the deliberate denial of personal happiness for the greater good of the monarchy. She would document the internal struggle, the moments of yearning for a different life, only to reaffirm her commitment to her role as guardian of the crown. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching personal sacrifice would be her decision regarding her other children. While Louis IX was her primary focus, she had several daughters and other sons. Her diary might reveal the difficult political marriages she arranged for her daughters, sending them to foreign courts, knowing she might never see them again. She would describe the suppression of her maternal instincts, forcing herself to view her children not just as beloved offspring, but as diplomatic assets, pawns in the intricate game of royal power. Her entries would be filled with the quiet grief of separation, the knowledge that her choices, while beneficial for France, came at a deeply personal cost to her family life. Blanc of Castiles' private thoughts would lay bare the immense emotional burden of her regency, revealing that her unwavering strength and political genius were forged in the crucible of profound personal. Number 1. Eleanor of Aquitaine's secret influence on her grandchildren. Eleanor of Aquitaine's long and tumultuous life spanned nearly 82 years, witnessing the reigns of 4 English kings, her husband, Henry II, and her sons, Richard I and John, and then her grandson, Henry III. Even after her formal regency ended and her son John ascended the throne, Eleanor remained a powerful, if often unseen force. What if her private diary, spanning her later years, revealed a secret influence she exerted over her numerous grandchildren, particularly the future Henry III, shaping their political views, instilling her own ambitions and subtly guiding their actions long after her direct power had waned? Her entries would not be about grand public acts, but about quiet conversations, carefully chosen stories, and the strategic transmission of her vast experience. Her diary would detail the intimate moments spent with her grandchildren. Away from the prying eyes of the court, she would describe them visiting her at Fontevraud Abbey or at her various castles, seeking her counsel. Her entries might reveal her conscious efforts to share her knowledge of European courts, her insights into the personalities of various rulers, and the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that defined the continent. She would have told them stories of her own experiences on crusade, her political battles with Louis VII and Henry II, and the triumphs and tragedies of her sons, not just as personal anecdotes, but as lessons in statesmanship, diplomacy. This was not just a grandmother doting. It was a former Queen Regent, a veteran of unprecedented political struggles, actively tutoring the next generation. The secret influence would be particularly potent with her grandson, the future Henry III, who inherited a kingdom in disarray after the disastrous reign of his father, King John. Eleanor's diary would recount her efforts to instill in Henry a strong sense of his Plantagenet heritage, reminding him of his lineage from William the Conqueror and her own ducal lines. She would have emphasized the importance of maintaining alliances, of understanding the needs of his subjects, and of learning from the mistakes of his predecessors. Her entries might detail the specific books she encouraged him to read, the historical examples she drew upon, and the ethical dilemmas she presented, all designed to shape his moral compass and his understanding of royal duty. She was effectively providing a masterclass in kingship, one that no formal tutor could offer. Her diary would also reveal her quiet efforts to mend the fractured relationships within the Plantagenet family, particularly between her various grandchildren. She would have understood the power of family bonds and the dangers of internal feuds, having lived through multiple rebellions by her own sons. Her entries might describe her subtle mediation efforts, her encouragement of reconciliation, and her attempts to foster a sense of shared purpose among the next generation of rulers. She would have understood that a strong, united family, even if politically disparate, could serve as a powerful force. Eleanor of Aquitaine's private thoughts would lay bare the profound impact of her wisdom and experience on her grandchildren, showing how her secret influence, exerted from the quiet solitude of her later years, continued to shape the political landscape of England, a silent architect of her own. Been you.